Welcome to today's episode of MicroConf On Air. I'm your host, Rob Walling, and today with Tracy Osborn, we're going to be talking about how to build a high-performance tech stack. Tracy, thanks for spending a half hour with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's going to be fun. Before we get into that, I want to remind folks that if you're watching this on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/microconf, in order to ask questions, you need to join 890 other founders or aspiring founders in microconfconnect.com. And that number's going up every day. So MicroConf Connect is a Slack channel that we're using to stay in touch with founders, stay in touch with each other, and connect, to connect with one another during these times. So microconfconnect.com if you want to check it out. Next week, I want to remind you, we have been doing daily MicroConf on airs. And next week, we're switching to a twice per week schedule, just dialing it back just a bit. So Tuesday and Thursday, we're going to be doing that, and we will continue to do, I talked with producer Xander, and we're going to continue doing the Zoom happy hours inside MicroConf Connect only, because those have been a big hit for folks who've joined. If you don't know, you can get 20, 30, 40 people in a Zoom room, and then you break out, and producer Xander has a control where he can say, I want, X rooms have 5 people each, and it randomly assigns, and then you can just hang out and you meet new people who are in Connect and meet, see old friends. I mean, I saw 3 or 4 people 2 weeks ago when I was in it, and I was like, hey, we haven't caught up in a while. So that's some fun stuff. As always, thanks to Basecamp and Stripe. They're our headline partners for MicroConf, and it's always a pleasure working with them. All right, so to intro our guest, who likely needs no introduction with this crowd, this is Tracy Osborn. She was the founder of Wedding Lovely, which was a startup she ran for several years. Got funding from Techstars, 500 Startups.
500 Startups. Yep.
500 Startups. Thank you. And then wound up shutting that down about a year and a half ago, and she has since then been working with me and A&R as a program manager at TinySeed. So thanks again, Tracy, for showing up and bringing you brought the good, you have a blanket behind you with fuzzy stuff. You have the good microphone. You have it all going on.
This is part of my normal chair, by the way. I always have the sheepskin on my office chair.
Did you get a lot of comments on it? Because it is
I
remarkable.
do. Because a lot of people ask me, like, where did you buy that chair? And I'm like, it's literally just a sheepskin.
A blanket
Anyone can build
over
this.
it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's cool.
It's nice. It's a nice little treat.
Yeah. So today we're going to be talking about building a high-performance tech stack. And the reason I wanted to get Tracy on here is, of all the people that I've worked with over my decades-long career now, there've just been a handful who are really good at staying on top of things. And frankly, they just don't lose things. You'll say, hey, you'll throw a one-off comment into a Slack DM or an email or a verbal comment in a meeting, in a Slack call, because we're all remote. And certain people just have a system, and that they have a system because it works. And 2 weeks later, they come back and they're like, oh, remember that thing you asked me to do? Yeah, here it is, and here's the results. And it's like, wow, most people would have forgotten that. And so that, plus Tracy's just a productive day-to-day person. She's very organized, and she has systems. And I've never heard her talk about them, on podcasts. And frankly, I've never dug into her system myself, so I'm a little bit curious about it as well. So that's where we're going to start. Feel free, as we're going, if you're in the MicroConf On Air channel, to ask questions. I think we had a question that was how to be productive, ? So that's going to be the whole time today. But if you have, and there is a question from Andy Thiemer that we'll get to a little later about managing, dealing with a lot of contractors and such. But to kick us off, let's set the stage. And I'm curious, how is it that you don't lose things?
It all comes from a deep-seated fear of my brain. And like when I was a child, I think I was teased a lot by my family about losing objects a lot. And so it's kind of turned maybe into a little bit too far into neuroticism, but it actually really obviously helps everything I do at TinySeed to have all these systems in place, just because I'm so afraid of losing things. So this is something I started establishing, I think, in university, was a policy of always writing something down. Which all sounds really obvious. And actually, I should take the moment to say, before I start going into the things that work for me, is that systems and keeping track of things and the ways that you work is going to differ from person to person. So when I talk about the things that I do, I don't necessarily mean to say, like, this is something that another person should do verbatim. these are things that I over like say the last 20 or so years that I've put in place that have really helped me. The different types of systems, like writing things down and the different kind of products that I use. And it might not work for another person, but it all comes down to just, I guess, the fear of losing things, and then being aware of the fact that I can't trust my brain to remember things. I don't trust myself that if someone says, hey, you need to do something like this, it's either going to be, I'm going to forget about it, or I'm going to spend the next, say, 12 or so hours, every half an hour thinking, oh, wait, I have to remember that. And then I move on and like doing my current task. And then half an hour later, it's like, oh, wait, I should remember that too. And I have squirrel brain throughout the day. So both those things kind of play a role in why that I try to have all these things in place so I don't forget things, because A, it helps me not to forget things, but B, it also allows me to better focus on my current tasks.
Right. And so, yeah, when you say systems are different for everyone, I think that's where you have a particular system and my system is different. We were talking before we got on the air that I use Trello, you use something else that we'll dig into. But that's why we will talk a lot about the kind of the meta stuff. What's one layer above? Because it doesn't matter if you use Trello or Todoist or Google Docs or whatever, Pipedrive or whatever you want to use, but the concepts we'll talk about here should apply to there, and we'll throw out some ideas for tools as well if folks are looking to do that. So back to that question then, you don't lose things because you don't trust your own brain. Dig into that. So what mechanically do you do then when Einar and myself are like, all right, 5 things, boom, boom, boom on a call, like where do those go in the ether? Are they floating around, carrier pigeon, or what are we doing there?
Yeah, I mean, first step is always writing things down on paper. I usually have notebooks all over my desk, so on the fly, I can get things down and on paper. I will lose these pieces of paper within the day, though. So I know that they need to move into someplace digital. The repositories I set up for these tasks. So what I've used personally, I've tried Trello, I've tried other systems. The thing that actually works best for me is Google Docs. So I just literally have a Google Docs where it's like the things are at the very top are the things that really need to be done, say that day or maybe that week. And then I have a bunch of categories underneath where it's like, hey, I'm waiting on, and then I can move things into like waiting on because I can't work on something immediately. Or maybe it's like, maybe someday. There's literally a category called maybe someday because something had come up in a conversation. And at that moment, I thought to myself, hey, that's a great idea, but we have no bandwidth to do that. So if I didn't write that down, I didn't put it someplace, I would completely forget about it. So this allows me to review every now and then, go through that list of maybe someday items. And maybe that will be the day that it's like, oh, okay, wait, I have the bandwidth for this. A good idea. So it's just Google Docs for me. I can access that on my phone. I almost never do. It's usually because it's work related. I just access it from my computer, but it's in my bookmarks bar. I believe I actually, when I first started working at TinySeed, I sent you the link. So you probably could dig it up and look at the things that I'm working on.
It'd be funny. This is what Tracy's working on. Yeah. And here's the cool thing. So I'm going to compare that to the system that I use because you and I accomplish the same exact thing. We capture everything that comes in. And we don't just have one list. You need lists for today, this week, waiting on, and this year or vision, long term. And I do that. I have a bunch of lists in the same Trello board. And then I either, if I know I'm waiting on something and I should hear back by a certain date, if it's via email, I have Boomerang or the snooze feature and I snooze it to a certain day, or I literally will go in my calendar and just boom, put an item in like, I should hear back by this time or do something. So that's my system. And that's the meta is like both of us have, you need these 4 or 5 things and you need something to a tickler file is what people used to call it. But it's a thing that pings you at a certain date or that you at least refer to daily and be like, should so-and-so have gotten back to me with that? Because in the old days, so when I first started doing systems, I did everything pen and paper, which I still love. And I really had a tough time getting away from Moleskine notebook. But when I would ask someone to do it, I'd say, hey, can you do this for me? Yes, I will do that. Awesome. I would scratch it off on my to-do list. This is when I was like 23 years old, right? I was like a construction, I worked kind of project management type stuff. And what I found is most of the time people didn't do it and I didn't circle back. And then I would look like the fool because, to my else's fault. And that's really that's one thing you're trying to avoid, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And so actually there's one thing that's I find really good about Google Docs. You could be able to do this in Trello, but one little extra piece that I don't have for TinySeed, but for my personal to-do list is that I'm also, one of the reasons I use Google Docs is at the top, I can have like a personal motivating statement Just be like, okay, these are the things that I want to achieve and say the next year, like next 6 months, next year, next 5 years. And they're just like aspirational. So before I started working at TinySeed and I was working on my books project, then it was like, okay, I get my book brought on by a major publisher, become a world renowned speaker, like things that are like way far out. But it was nice to have this like reminder of what I need to do that day, because when I'm looking at my to-do list, it can get really overwhelming. And I needed some sort of reminder what I was trying to move myself forward to be like, okay, cool. Now I actually do want to achieve those things. And then I'm in a better brain space for achieving those items. So that's a little thing that I just learned over like a few, I don't know, years or so is what's the things I can add to the system that's going to work particularly for my situation.
Yeah, I really like that. I love the flexibility. I mean, that is one thing I miss from using the Moleskine notebook is I could do anything because it's just pen and paper. And essentially a Google Doc is really just pen and paper, and the input is a laptop instead of a pen. But I feel like I definitely do miss some of that having moved to Trello. Trello is not very strongly typed. It's a little bit, it's like slightly more strongly typed than a Google Doc, right? Which is very loosely typed. You can kind of do whatever. And then there are going to be systems, I think, like Todoist, and I don't even know. I've never really used to-do systems because they always seem way too opinionated for me, and I like the looseness of it. So I like that point you made. I think that's what comes down, like where you said, it's different for different people. If you really need the external discipline applied to you and you find a to-do list app or whatever that just drives you to do your best, then do it. I tried several, didn't like them. And, so I think either one works.
And I will say that I actually do move to paper for daily tasks. So usually if I go to the office, I'll take a look at that big to-do list and things I really want to achieve that day. And it's probably just 2 or 3 things because the day gets distracting. You start chatting on Slack, things that happen. So it's like, what are like the biggest things that I need to have achieved that day? Because I really like that satisfaction of crossing something out. And it's like that the dopamine center of my brain gets very happy when I can cross something off. And there's nothing like that with Google Docs. So that's another little thing that I do.
Yeah, that's cool. So I have more questions for you, but I want to address this question from Andy Thiemer. He said, much of my productivity comes from using contractors, not only coding, but design, marketing, tasks, and operational to-dos. When I had 1 or 2 contractors, I would typically drop what I was doing in a chat with them. Let's assume like a Slack DM or something. Now with 5 to 10 part-timers, it is becoming more difficult. Any tips on how to manage a larger bench more efficiently? What's the next level up? Because this always happens, right? I mean, as your team expands, the old tools, the old ways of doing things don't work. And that's why tools are built. We can't use Google Docs and Slack DMs for everything. If you have 100 people, it breaks down. So you have thoughts on that?
Yeah. When it comes to any system, whether it has to be working with a team or with yourself, it's identifying what the stressful parts are. What are the things that you feel like might be falling through the cracks? And that's going to be different per person. I'm not exactly, you didn't really go into detail. And this is where I would ask, okay, what are the things that are becoming really hard with these part-timers? Is it information? Are they always asking questions about things like repeat questions coming up, things that they should have known that I've forgotten about, in which case it could mean that, maybe that's a time to document what's going on, get a central repository information. So you have a place that people can log in or go to find that information without having to come to you for questions and making it, everything kind of distracting and inefficient. Now, if it's a process, like you're bringing a lot of part-timers on, you have to teach each part-timer the same process, again, documentation where it's like, okay, what is this process? Write out this documentation. What is the steps that everyone needs to go through? And that's going to help you or the person in the future that's going to be training those people to walk through those pieces. So you kind of get the point where it's like, okay, now that you're, have a bunch of part-timers underneath the system, it's like addressing those pieces that have now become more stressful or they're taking more time or the things that aren't really working for you, and figuring out what can you do to put things in place to kind of address those things, what kind of tools and what kind of systems, what kind of products you can start using at that moment.
Yeah, and my thoughts there, just to throw out a few, because this is what we had this problem at Drip as we went from 2 to 5 to 10 to eventually, when I left the team was, I don't know, 70 or 80, but the for developers and designers who were, well, assuming they were in the code base, we used GitHub issues to track what they were up to and what they were working on and all that. With the marketing team, if we had sprints and all that, we were often using Trello as kind of a loosely, again, a weekly typed thing compared to Basecamp or Teamwork if you want more strongly typed projects. And it's weird, I know a lot of us, like I actually don't like process very much. I don't like rules and I don't like process. but we need, but some people do. And Tracy, you're really good at setting up SOPs and getting that stuff. And we need both of it. You need both those people on your team in essence, right? And so I think, for Andy, it's like, even if you're resistant to doing Basecamp or Teamwork or Trello, I do think that's probably the next step. Some tool like those is a next step up from chat, because you're right, chat just becomes overwhelming at a certain point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, we have another
getting stuff. Oh, I just want to say, just getting stuff out of your brain and then in some place where it can be stored, because those questions that come up or those processes and whatnot can live in your brain, but it's going to help the process run more smoothly with those new people when it's out there. But the other thing that I haven't really mentioned is, if you hire someone, you want someone to take over this piece for you, it's already there, which is really awesome. So they can just like your information is already out there and they can pick up from that.
Right. It's not a bunch of chat log in a threaded conversation somewhere. And frankly, you could, another alternative to the tools I just mentioned, you could literally have a Google Doc with one page for each contractor, as long as you don't mind them seeing what each other's doing. And it could just be kind of Tracy's organization of that. That's another way to do it if you'd prefer to keep it super lightweight, We have another question from Peter Lorinx. He says, how many items are in your doc right now? How many are current versus someday maybe? And I like this question a lot, because I've known people who make their to-do list and, you can't see me on camera, it's too narrow, but they make their to-do list and it's, they get 50, 100, 200 things, and then they have captured everything, but they lose stuff because they put too much on it. So you go first, and then I'll weigh in.
Yeah, I had to open it up and see. Because of the virus stuff, my to-do list actually has gotten a little bit crazier than normal, just because I haven't had a lot of mental bandwidth to do things right now, which is something I guess we should mention, is that it's going to be really hard to be productive in general because of everything that's going on right now. Right now I also, the reason I like Google Docs is because I can do tiered bullets. So I can have like here's a task, and then I can list out every single piece of that task. So it's quite long. If you looked at every dot on its own, it's probably about 20 items, and that would say is the stuff I wanted to do in the next week. But a lot of those are like, there are some personal things in there. I had a trip to Europe that I was going to go speak at FemtoConf next month, and I have 5 bullets where it's like, cancel this, cancel this, cancel this, cancel this. Right. I could have said like, cancel the trip to Europe, but for me, it's better for me to list out every single piece of that process to make it easier for me to cross things off. So it's 20 items on this is the things I want to work on right now. Like 2 things on my waited on list. There's 4 things on my, I can't work on this right now because of various reasons. And I can write out what's that current status. And this used to be a lot longer when I was doing due diligence for TinySeed. This actually went like pages long, because that's actually where I put everything at first. It was just on my to list. So it's like, my task was supposed to be keeping track of these companies that we're working with and where they are in the process and what happened. And I started getting pages and pages and pages long. And I eventually had to figure out a new system for that and pull it on my to-do list, because it got really overwhelming.
Yeah. And that's like my good rule of thumb, is if I'm over in my main Trello that I kind of am trying to work down, if I have more than about 15 or 20 items, and some of those do stay at the bottom longer than I want because they're not well defined, and they shouldn't be. So I'm kind of breaking my own system. But if I'm over that, I start to think, I look through it and I think, do I need to hire someone, even, or delegate this to a virtual assistant or anyone who, any of the colleagues we work with, or are any of these just not that important and I've added crap in here? And so I pretty ruthlessly go through my to-dos and remove things that I came up with 3 weeks ago when, I was washing the dishes and I threw it in the Trello board, and I really shouldn't have. There should have been a better vetting process. It isn't actually a to-do. It's more of a think more about this later, And then my longer term one, the vision one, that probably has 10 on it at any given time. And I find that once you get more than that, it's just too many to scan through, and that everything's not, just pick the top 5 or 10 that are most important and kind of ignore the others.
Yeah, it gets overwhelming.
Yeah. So no more questions right now, but folks can certainly weigh in the chat. Um, what are the key signs? I think you touched on this a little earlier, but you're a good systems thinker in this sense. Like, if someone's watching this and they don't really have a system, like what are some really good signs, some key signs that they need to put something in place?
So I think there's two different ways of looking at it. There's like reactive and then there's forward looking systems. So reactive, as mentioned before, is when you identify what's something that's stressing you out, what's something that might be feeling like you're constantly referring back to, and you want to stop having to refer back to. So a non-tech way of looking at this is, say, your keys for your house keys. And if every single day you're like, where are my keys? And you've lost them, you're running around the house, your partner's like, where's your keys? And you're trying to find them. A system is literally just putting them in the same place every single time. So it's just like identifying like, hey, every single day that I'm losing my keys, I need to figure out a way to fix this process. And so then you start leaving it one place, which then helps out family members because they might be asking where your keys are, and you're able to tell them the exact place they are. You can save yourself time. You're not searching for your keys every single day. So to bring that into, say, tech and founders and the things that we're working on, it's an example I have is when I started working on at MicroConf with you. And I think I was asking you a lot of questions about when I was helping you with speakers for MicroConf Europe, was asking you questions about who spoke before, what was the talks of that. And I was, we didn't have information in one place for all of these items. So there was this one day where it was like, we're going to put it on Notion. We're going to write out, all the speakers from MicroConf, what the year that they were that they spoke, what were the titles they have into one place. And that helped me like A, save you time because I wasn't constantly peppering you with questions, but B, in general for MicroConf, it will hopefully lead to better productivity in the future because all the information is off of someone's brain or in the systems that you had in place on your computer, but now it's in a team situation. So I was looking at like, oh, hey, I shouldn't be asking these questions and taking up your time over and over and over. So let's put something in place so we can do better, essentially.
Yep. And that was a good case of everything being in my head. I mean, that's
Yeah,
the MicroConf example. It was just, I just never put it down. And this shows a difference in our personalities. Like I tend to keep a bunch of stuff in my head. I don't keep to-dos in my head, but institutional knowledge like that really should be written down. I had never taken invested the time to do it. And so.
Yeah, and you're not alone. A lot of people are like that. A lot of people, most people, I would say, it's really easy to just keep things in your brain because it's hard to tell yourself that it's okay to spend the time to put things into a system because you're really busy with things. So you have to like carve out the time in your day. It doesn't feel like it's productive time because you're working on something, a problem that's yeah, exactly. So I was like, okay, what's the time I'm going to have to actually spend the time to work on this thing that's maybe you feel that maybe at that moment it's not going to pay off in the future, but it probably will. It's just like carving out that time is really hard.
Yep. Cool. So we have a comment and a couple questions now. And this always goes so fast. We are running a little short on time, but let's dig into it. Andy Themer says, I have a junkyard track in my Trello board as a place to demote ideas that become not important. And I think that's cool. If you're concerned about just deleting or archiving something, throw it in there, refer back to that every month. Every 2 weeks, just whenever you think about it. And if there's an amazing diamond in that rough, then promote it again. But most often than not, I think you'll find that your filters are pretty good. Another question from Peter Larinx. What tips can you share about how you protect your attention? For example, stopping interruptions and getting in a flow state.
That's hard for me because like most of my job is just reacting to a lot of things.
Interruption. Yeah, you're interrupted. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's the reason why I write everything down because every single hour there's something that's pulling my attention one way or another in what I do with TinySeed. And
how about when you used to write code or you used to write books? Because then you had to get into it. What did you do then?
I have this, you've seen it before. It's my time timer. So I do use the Pomodoro method when I need to actually sit down and focus on things. So turn off all notifications everywhere. And then Pomodoro is like, okay, you're going to tell yourself like, hey, I'm just going to spend, I think it's 25 minutes. Just going to spend 25 minutes straight working on one task, and then I'll have 5 minutes to go indulge the squirrel brain, look at Facebook, look at Reddit, refresh virus news and whatnot. I do that actually at TinySeed when I need to sit down and like do some ideation or forward thinking stuff. So it's nicer rather than just sitting down. I need a deadline essentially, and rather than just sitting down and saying I need to work on this, by giving myself a time limit, I need to work on this for 25 minutes. I find that it tricks my brain into being more productive. So that's like the biggest tool in my tool belt, other than turning off notifications everywhere. Every now and then I'll actually go into my host file and block Reddit, because it's just a habit at this point where I just like, as soon as I get distracted by something or frustrated by something I'm working on, my hand will just automatically start typing Reddit, and then it's all over. So I like block in the host files because it'll resolve, and it won't resolve. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not supposed to be there, and that I'm supposed to be working. So it's like, turning off distractions and then giving myself a small piece of time to really focus. And I find that as soon as I start really focusing on something, then I actually can get into that flow state. But I just have to have that deadline. And that's something I do.
Yep, very cool. Next question is from Google. It's from Jonathan Weinberg. He says, what are some good tasks for a virtual assistant, and what are some of the best services for that? Oh, I know, tasks for virtual assistant. So Sherry and I have a personal, like a personal / executive assistant that we pay. I hired her through Upwork, and she works works as needed. I have never used a service like Zirtual, but Zirtual is the one that I would probably, comes top of mind for me. You have thoughts on that, or tasks as well?
Yeah, I have a blog post about it, actually, about when I hired a virtual assistant for Wedding Lovely. And I didn't use Zirtual just because I was so low income that it was too spendy for me. I believe at the time. It's been a while since I looked at Zirtual, but I used it was like a forum for finding virtual assistants in the Philippines, and I found someone who was amazing for $5 an hour, and we worked together for over about 2 years, if I recall correctly. Anyways, the things I did in place for the virtual assistant at Wedding Lovely was, again, the documentation of tasks, of things that I was doing as a founder that could be moved into her plate. And a lot of these things, they couldn't involve a lot of creativity, but it was things like support requests, where it's like, here's like the top 10 things I get from the people I'm working with, the emails that are coming in, and what are my responses to them. And then I put that in a doc. So when they came in, she can refer that doc and be like, this is how Tracy has handled this situation in the past. And then she would send that over. And if it was something that I hadn't handled, then she would ask me, I would tell her how to handle it, and then she would add it to the doc. And so at the end, we actually had this really good document of all the different responses and questions and support requests and things that had handled that she would work on. And it was really, really great for support. She also did things where we were like running a blog, and it was all the system for getting things into WordPress and getting things out of WordPress, and all those things, all these like little tasks, all these things that you could just list out all the little steps that involve and document everything that's involved are really great tasks for a virtual assistant. Just as long as you really write things out, you really be very clear, write more than you should, just like get every like question that could be asked out into that sheet, and then continue to update those documents if you work with that virtual assistant to answer the questions or things that come up, which is really handy, because if you lose your personal assistant, which can happen, then it means the next time you bring another person on, you can do less training because it have all these things documented.
Yep. And I think it helps to get to know your virtual assistant and learn what his or her unique skills are. That's not all just admin, because like I had someone who happened to know WordPress really well, and so I had her help me out with that. I had someone who knew how to do some light design work and audio editing even, and she would help with that. And so it's, every VA is not created equal, and in terms of their skill set and what they're able to work on.
Yeah, I was able to do. Oh, sorry. I was able to do a bunch of looms just to walk through things, just not just write things down, but I taught her how to do WordPress through Loom, just doing a bunch of recordings.
Yeah, screencasts are a great way to do it. We had Sherry, my personal assistant, or VA, whatever you want to refer to her as, we had her register the kids for like all their summer camps, because it's a pain. It's way more time consuming than you think it's going to be. And once the kids picked it, it was just like, I took a picture, I emailed it to her, because they did it by hand, and then she just booked them all and made sure everything worked, and then put them on our calendar and invited it. So that was probably a couple hours worth of work. And it's a thing of like, this is not rocket science to do. Anyways, we are at time, and I want to be mindful of folks' time. Tracy Makes, thank you so much for joining me today. She's at Tracy Makes on Twitter.
Yep, and TracyOsborn.com. Nope, I think just go out and be productive as much as possible, because things are crazy right now.
Yeah, this is the time to talk about that for sure. So next week, again, we're going to the Tuesday, Thursday schedule. Tuesday, we're going to be doing, I keep hitting my mic. Tuesday, we're going to be doing live copy audits with Leanna Patch. And Thursday, we're going to be talking to Cortland Allen about what he's learned interviewing 155 startup founders. Join us again, microconfonair.com or youtube.com/microconf. Same time, noon Central, 1 p.m. Eastern, same place. See ya. Thank you so much.